In this video, I'm going to give you my top 6 tips to make your drums hit harder. When laying out drum arrangements, it's good to know exactly what you want out of your sounds. So that brings us directly to tip number 1, sample selection. Here I have a loop that I made for this tutorial. You can hear that all the drums seem to fit together well, and you can clearly hear all of the elements. Using sample libraries like splice.com, factory libraries, or even sample kits from artists can really help keep your drums sounding tight. Make sure to pick sounds that provide the energy and feel that you want and stand out the way that you need. In this example, I replaced the kick drum with one that doesn't really work. I'm sure you probably heard that now the kick is muffled and sits way back in the mix. Then when the new kick came in, the loop came back to life. When you pick samples that don't fit in your beat, it kills the energy. The next tip is a simple one, but is just as impactful as good sample selection. Tip number 2 is levels. Making sure each drum element is at the proper level is key to having harder hitting drums. Listen here as I bring the hi-hat up too loud. When they're too loud, they become piercing, distracting, and overpowering. Conversely, if I bring them down too quiet, the bounce of the drums start to fade out. I like to mix my drums by starting with the kick. I like to set its level to -12 dB and use that for the bass level of the whole beat. Then I usually shoot for the 808 to be no less than 6 dB lower than the kick. But play around and find levels that are good for you. Then continue bringing the rest of the elements in to taste. Tip number 3 is using parallel compression. Parallel compression allows you to squash your drums to oblivion without destroying them. This adds that thick, distorted feel without overdriving the drums. Put a compressor on your drum bus. Use the fastest attack possible so it really crushes the whole signal. For this purpose, the auto release tends to be fine, and I like to use a more aggressive ratio like 10:1. Pull down the threshold until the signal gets really crushed, and then dial the wet-dry knob back until the effects are adding the fullness of drums that you need. Here's without parallel compression. And with. This is a really good way to fatten up your drums without doing any damage. There's also another process that is similar to this which uses an audio recording, but I'll explain that in a bit. Tip number 4 is adding glue. Glue, otherwise known as bus compression, helps level off the elements to make them feel more cohesive. Drag a glue compressor or a bus compressor onto your drum bus. Use a slower attack so it doesn't crush the whole group, and then a faster release so it's more responsive. I also like a 2:1 ratio, that way the compression isn't so aggressive. Pull back on the threshold until you get about 2 to 5 decibels of gain reduction, then use the makeup gain to boost it back up. Here's without glue compression. And with. Now you can hear that the snares and the hi-hats are a little more present, making the whole mix feel a lot more full. Tip number 5 is saturation. Sometimes when adding glue, I'll reach for a saturator instead of a compressor. I typically do this when I want to squeeze everything while adding a little bit more grit. Drop your saturator of choice on your drum bus, and then push the drive up a little bit to add some color. I also like to use the soft clip function to help round out the peaks and tighten up the mix a little bit. Then feel free to cycle through the algorithms and tweak the drive to find your desired tone. Just be careful because too much can ruin your drums. Once you found what you like, back your output off the same amount that you've gained with your drive. Here's without the saturator. And with. My final tip for harder hitting drums is using a transient shaper. By putting a transient shaper on your drum bus, you can push it up to boost the sustain or the attack a little bit more. Push up the attack and the sustain a little bit to boost the snap of the drums, which will add more punch to the mix. Without transient shaper, and with. Once again, you could hear the hats and the snares filled out a little bit more to make it more punchy. Now for a bonus tip. Looking back to parallel compression, I mentioned that there is an audio recording trick that is similar to using a compressor. A cool trick to add grit to your drums is to take an audio recording of your drums directly from your speakers. Import that into your session, EQ it, then add some saturation to taste. Then mix it in parallel to your drum group. This can add depth and bite to your drums in a very unique way. And the natural reverb from the room in the recording helps brighten everything up. Don't forget to mess around with different effects to put on your recording channel to find your own unique sound to layer in. Now that you know how to add depth and punch to your drums, click here to watch my new How to Make Trap for Beginners series.